Good evening. My name is Bernie Lucas, and I'm currently a drug and alcohol counselor with his advanced addiction and drug and alcohol certificate. And tonight I've chosen to talk about change and its dynamics. And I think a good model or a good example of what we'll be talking about is the movie Groundhog's Day with Bill Murray and Audrey McDowell. And Bill Murray certainly changed through the movie and for the better. But trying to look at how do we change what we're doing. We currently are living in the worldwide COVID-19 pandemic. And this is something that no one wanted, but it happened. And we are challenged with reacting or responding to this pandemic. And we can look at other ways in which we want to change a behavior, whether it's smoking, drinking, gambling, pornography, whatever the addiction, whether it's to a substance or to an event, we are challenged with changing things. And certainly from a very young age and throughout life, we have many opportunities to examine how we make decisions and whether or not we want to change things. Now, the first thing I think is important is to identify the elements of change. And there are three main elements of change. And without these elements, change is not going to happen. One time I attended a training and the presenter gave this little exercise, and I thought it was ideal for showing what has to happen in order for change to happen. So what I'd like you to do, I invite you to simply hold your hands in front of you and separate them. Now, again, I'd like you to fold your hands and look at the way you have your hands folded. And this time when you separate them and put them back together, I want you to fold them the opposite way. So what we're going to do is fold your hands, separate them, and then fold them the opposite way. Go ahead and do that. How does that feel? A lot of people who do this, it's weird. It's uncomfortable. It's something crazy. And when I first asked you to fold your hands, did you have to stop and think, or did it just happen? And more than likely, it just happened because you've been doing this over and over again for years. And it becomes a habit. And anything that is habitual is just, you're on automatic pilot. Now, you were able, once I told you that there was a different way of folding your hands, you became aware that there's a different way. And you were able to fold your hands, hopefully, in a different way. Now, in order for change to happen, the first element that has to be present is I got to be aware. I got to be aware that something can be done differently. In the movie Groundhog's Day, Bill Murray eventually figured it out that it was the same old thing was happening over and over again. And he wanted something different to occur. And he had to become aware of what was happening that caused this repetition. So now you are aware that you can fold your hands differently. How are you going to do it for the rest of your life? More than likely, the same old way. Now, I'm not going to do this if I was serious, would this make a difference? If I told you that if I saw you consistently and constantly holding your hand the new way, the uncomfortable way, I would give you $1,000. Would that make a difference? More than likely, for most people, yeah, it would. And that's the second element that has to be present. We got to want it. If we don't want it, it ain't going to happen. We have to be motivated. So we can be aware that there is a different way of doing something. There's a different way of behaving. But if we don't want to do it, it simply isn't going to happen. We have to be motivated. Now, with the pandemic, yes, we became aware that there was a worldwide pandemic. And we were asked to do things differently. We were asked to social distance. We were asked to wash our hands frequently. We were asked to wear masks. We were asked to take our temperature. We were asked many different things. But if we didn't want to do it, they simply didn't happen. So just because we're aware, change is not going to happen. We have to want it to happen. Now, there are a couple of different types of motivators. There are external motivators and there are internal motivators. Now, an example of an external motivator are negative consequences, fear of negative consequences. Certainly people with addiction or with criminal behavior, a great example of negative motivator is incarceration or the fear of incarceration, fear of punishment. Now, an external motivator for somebody wearing a mask would be being fined. And there are some communities, some states or whatever, people could be fined for not wearing a mask. We have some college students that were penalized with losing their tuition payment, or they were no longer permitted to remain in college. Those are external motivators. And sometimes external motivators, certainly negative consequences, can impact us. But overall, negative motivators tend to lose their effectiveness over time. Just the fear of getting a ticket could cause me to obey the speed limit. The fear of going to jail could help me make healthy decisions and obey the law. But those external motivators are going to lose their effectiveness as time goes by. Now, another type of motivator is something that is internal, something that comes from within. And I'm going to choose not to smoke cigarettes. I'm going to choose not to use substances. I'm going to choose to wear a mask because I care about myself and I care about my family. I want to be with them. Certainly with the COVID-19 virus, I can choose to wear a mask and choose to social distancing because I care about what my behavior how that will impact somebody else. And early on, we were told that wearing a mask more likely protects somebody else from getting the COVID, as opposed from protecting me from getting it from someone else. And strong indicator, ingredient of an internal motivator is a sense of empathy, being able to put myself in somebody else's shoes. If I have a large amount of empathy inside, Well, yes, I'm going to care about others, and I'm concerned about others. And if I know that I can help others, it gives me a good feeling. And internal motivators are certainly going to last a long time. And it's important to be aware of what my motivators are. Now, I have to be aware, I have to want it. And then the third thing, if I'm serious about changing the way I fold my hands, I'm aware that there's a different way, and I want that $1,000 a week. But now I got to make sure that it happens. So what do? Practice, practice. I wake up in the morning and I see I fold my hands differently. I sit down at breakfast and I make sure I fold my hands differently. Throughout the day, I'm constantly folding my hands differently. I'm putting it into practice. And for those who are my age or older, the old saying is, how does one get to play at Carnegie Hall, which is a famous symphony theater in New York City? And the answer is practice, practice, practice. A good example of this is Michael Jordan. He is said to be possibly the best basketball player to ever play the game. But it was also said of him that he was the first one in to show up for practice, and he was the last one to leave the gym. Now, come on, Michael, you're the top of the game. How many times do you have to dribble the ball? How many times do you have to practice passing it or shooting fouls or going through these drills? You are the best. But he practices, practices, so that when it comes down to crunch time, he doesn't have to stop and think, oh, this is the way I'm going to do it. It happens automatically. And it's like waking up one morning and getting out of bed, and I folded my hands, and I go, oh my gosh, that's the new way. And I didn't think about it. It just happened. And any professional athlete, any famous musician, anybody at the top of whatever their career or sports, they practice over and over again. So the three elements that have to be present for change to happen are awareness, being motivated, want it, and then practicing it. Now, looking at the movie Groundhog Day, Bill Murray, he wanted something to change. He wanted to see February the 3rd. And he became aware that it was happening over and over again. And something motivated him to try to bring about a change. And in the movie, for most guys, it was a woman. He wanted to have a relationship to get to know the other reporter. So he was motivated to do things differently. But unfortunately, it was, he was doing it in sneaky, manipulative ways. Only when he became empathetic and wanting to help others did the movie change, and he woke up and the day changed. So we have to be sincere in our desire to change. So being aware, being motivated, and then putting into action. Now, back in the late 70s, there were two gentlemen by the name of Prochaska and D. Clementi who came up with this theoretical model called the stages of change. And in the stages of change, they identified 5 stages. And this is kind of will be a very simplified explanation of the changes. And I ran across this allegory of change, and I think it is an excellent example or explanation of the different stages of change. So I'm going to read this, and first example is I walk down the street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I am lost. I am helpless. It isn't my fault, and it takes forever to find a way out. Now, that first stage is called precontemplation. And it's can be identified simply by denial. There's no hole down that sidewalk. I don't see it. There's nothing there. But guess what? I walk down and I fall in it. And it takes forever to get out. It isn't my fault. And nothing changes. And when I used to work at a juvenile facility, oftentimes I would ask a new resident coming in, I would say, hey, Billy, what kind of problems you got? And a common response was, I don't have any problems. It's my parents, it's my teachers, it's the staff, it's whoever. But I don't have any problems. And if I don't have any problems, do I need to do anything? No way. In regards to the COVID-19, in the beginning, certainly, and maybe today, some people say, no, there's no pandemic. That's not a problem. And they just go right down the street, and some fall in that hole. But it isn't their fault, and it takes a long time for them to come to grips with what is happening. So that first stage is pre-contemplation, total denial. And more than likely, that behavior is going to continue on and on and on. Now, the second version reads, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I can't believe I'm in the same place. But it isn't my fault, and it still takes a long time to get out. Now, if you can try to recall the first version compared to the second version, and what is the difference? We saw in the first one, the guy walked down the same street. He was oblivious that there was any hole, and he fell in. The second guy walked down the same street. There's a deep hole. And guess what? He saw it. He was aware. And that's the first element. He was aware, hey, there's a hole. But what did he do? He convinced himself that I'll just pretend it isn't there. I don't really have a problem. There's no pandemic. And it's going to go away. And what happens? He falls in the hole, just like the first guy. And it takes forever to get out. And it's not his fault. And his attempt to pretend that it's not there doesn't work. And the same way with any addiction, with any problem. I don't have a drinking problem. I don't have a substance abuse problem. I'm going to pretend that it's not there, that it's not causing me headaches. It's not causing me problems with my family or with the law or with my job or with my schooling. And as long as I pretend that that it's not a problem, then like Groundhog's Day, I'm going to wake up and the same thing is going to happen over and over and over. Now, the third story, or the third version, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I still fall in. It's a habit. My eyes are open. I know where I am. It is my fault. And I get out immediately. Now, what's the difference between the third one and the second one? Well, obviously, he fell in the hole, just like the other two guys. But his eyes were open. He realized that it's a habit. And he not only is aware that there's a hole, but he wants something different. He's motivated to have a different outcome. And so he gets out immediately. And he doesn't blame somebody else. He takes responsibility for it. And guess what? I do have a problem. Whether it's shoplifting, pornography, or sex, or drugs, or smoking, whatever it is, I see that there's a problem. And I want to do something about it. So he's motivated. And he gets out and he goes down the path of trying to address the problem. Now, we look at the pandemic. Again, we became aware that there was one. And like the second guy, we had the option of saying, well, no, it's really not a problem. What's the big deal? It will simply go away. And I'm just going to pretend that it's no big deal. Pretending didn't work, and it never works. Or I can say, yeah, this is a problem. And I care about not contracting it or exposing it to others. And I want to do something about it. Now, we can go on to the fourth stage. In the fourth version of the allegory reads, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. And I'm going to pause purposely to give you a chance to say the next line. You walk down the same street. Know that there's a deep hole in the sidewalk. And as you come up to it, what do? And the answer is, I walk around it. So I'm not only aware that there's a problem, and I'm not only motivated, I want to do something. But guess what? Now I'm taking action. I'm walking around. Now we have pre-contemplation. Contemplation is the second one. Preparation is the third one, motivated. And then the fourth one, now we're doing something. Now this is the action stage. We are committed to addressing the problem. Now, to be in this stage, it just doesn't take a week or two to practice this new behavior. It takes about 5-6 months to have this change incorporated. So then, yeah, more than likely, I'm waking up and I'm holding my hands differently. That's the action stage. And it has to be in place for a considerable amount of time. Now, there's one more stage, and it's called the maintenance stage. And in the maintenance stage, if we take the allegory, and the last one we read, we walk down the same street, we come up to the sidewalk, and we walk around it. Now, how can I improve over that? What can I do differently that would even be a better result of walking down that same street, coming up to the hole, and walk around? I'll give you a couple of seconds to come up with an answer. Okay, the answer is I choose a different street. I avoid that problem altogether. And now this time, I'm assessing the problem. I'm sitting back and trying to figure out how in the world did I get where I am today with the pandemic? How did this come about? How are various ways that I can address it? And that's how the scientists came up with wearing a mask, social distancing, Avoid large gatherings, especially indoors. Wash my hands frequently. Take my temperature. These are things that I can do. Certainly with addiction. In that first allegory, where the guy was oblivious to where the hole was, it's, again, I'll talk about my memories of working with juveniles. And oftentimes somebody would do something, and I would say, hey, Billy, what in the world made you do that? And he would sit back and come up with those three famous words. I don't know, followed by the next three famous words. It just happened. And sometimes we say, I don't know, because we don't want to talk about it, what the topic is. But other times, I don't know, because we're serious. We don't know. And that's when it's scary. Because if we don't know what's leading up to this problem, what are the elements that are bringing about this problem, then guess what? We're going to be living in Groundhog's Day. It's going to be happening over and over and over. Now, with the pandemic, yeah, we all have a challenge. How did this happen? And if we say, well, I don't know, well, we know what's going to happen. It's going to happen over and over and over again. We have to figure out what is happening. And I have to be honest with myself and be sincere in trying to figure this out. Now, what's even more important in identifying what I'm doing to bring about this problem, more importantly, I got to figure out what I do that brings about healthy behavior, that brings about successful behavior, that brings about happiness, positive changes. And if I'm aware of what I'm doing that's helping me live sustained recovery, helping me succeed in school, helping me get advancements in my career or on my job, if I know what I'm doing, well, yeah, it's kind of like Groundhog's Day in reverse. But these positive things keep happening over and over again. And it gets to a point that I don't have to think about it and figure this out over and over again. It happens automatically. So in order to get to that maintenance stage, this change needs to be in place for about 12 months. So it's not going to be short-lived. It's going to be in place for a long time. Now, if we were to graph the progression of change, and on this graph, the vertical line would indicate the amount of progress that I'm making. So the higher I go up on the graph, the more change is occurring. And this is a positive thing. Now, on the horizontal line of the graph, this indicates the time, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, and so forth, that this change is happening. And unfortunately, we think that our line, our graph needs to look like this. It's a diagonal line. And this indicates that the more days go by, the farther and farther time elapses, the greater the progress I'm making. And unfortunately, that's not realistic. Why? Because we're human. We have problems. We make mistakes. We're not perfect. Change, instead of looking like a straight diagonal line, looks more elliptical. We go along and we're making change. And guess what? What does this indicate? This indicates that, yeah, I went 2 steps backward. I relapsed. I made a mistake. Now, there's a challenge there because sometimes we don't like to make mistakes. We don't like to have failures in our lives. But that's, again, human. But this going backwards is very important because that gives me the opportunity to learn from what happened. To sit back and say, oh my gosh, I wonder how that happened. I wonder how, again, with the pandemic, that there was a decline in the incidence of people being infected, but now it's elevating itself again. Wow, we can sit back and we can say, well, it's because this person did that and that person did that. But no, we can use that for more information, more knowledge to try to address what I need to do back on track and make even greater progress. So yes, it's common. It would be nice that we go through the stages of change and get to stage 5 maintenance and stay there. But if we flip back to stage 3 preparation, or go all the way back to contemplation, then we have that opportunity to figure out, well, what happened? And hopefully I'm motivated to get back on track, even though it's a challenge and it's hard. But that's the opportunity. Now, the next thing that I'd like to look at, just a second. There is something that precedes a behavior. Before I grabbed my bottle and took a drink, something had to happen. Before you got on to this Zoom video in this presentation, before you turn the on button on, something had to happen. Before we put on a mask, before we social distance, before I call up my sponsor, something has to happen. And that happens here. I got to think about it. Before I do something, I have to. And if I'm going to change my behavior, I got to first change the way I think. And just like changing behavior, there needs to be 3 elements present in order for my thinking to change. And again, the number 1 element for my thinking to change is to be aware of it. Now, we as humans, from an early age, we begin to see a difference between right and wrong. And certainly 2-year-olds, they're famous for saying no, 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 no. They learn that. And by the time we're 7 or 8 years of age, we have a pretty good understanding of the difference between right and wrong. Now, there have been some studies that babies as young as 6 months, 3 months of age, they have demonstrated an awareness of the difference between bad and good, right and wrong. And being aware of that. Certainly, again, really cements itself by the time we're 7, 8 years of age. But we humans also have a keen ability of convincing ourselves that it's okay to do something. And we convince ourselves typically by justifying and rationalizing things. Now, there are different ways of thinking that we can convince ourselves. And some people call these thinking errors. The number one thinking error, and I mentioned it earlier in looking at the pre-contemplation stage, is denial. I simply don't have a problem. Shoplifting is not a problem. Stealing is not a problem. When we talk about criminal thinking, there are some people that rob banks, and they choose to rob banks. And they tell themselves there is nothing wrong with robbing a bank. The only time it could become wrong is when? When does bank robbing become wrong in the eyes of the bank robber? And when they get caught. As long as I don't get caught, there's nothing wrong with it. So as long as I deny that I don't have a problem, there is no problem, then I continue. And it's simple. I don't have to do anything. It's very easy. So denial, I would say, is the number one way of convincing myself, of justifying that I don't have a problem. Now, there are other ways that I can do this as well. Another common way is what they call minimization, making something less serious than what it is. And for instance, somebody could say, well, I don't have a problem with alcohol. I just drink beer. They could tell themselves, well, I'm only going to go out and have 3 drinks tonight. And there were 2 key words in those sentences that tip off that I'm trying to minimize. And those 2 key words are just and only. I just drink beer. I only get drunk on the weekends. And I'm convincing myself that it's okay to do it. Now, if I'm going to change a behavior, I got to be aware of how I'm convincing myself. And the simple thing is, I heard just come out of my mouth. I heard only come out of my mouth. And being aware of others, just tuning in to see how often those words are being used. And if I'm aware of it, that gives me a better chance of changing my thinking, changing my behavior. But if I don't give a darn, if I'm not motivated to do anything about it, nothing's going to happen. So yes, we got to be aware, we got to be motivated. Now, another common type of way of convincing myself that it's okay to do something is called making excuses. And some people refer to this as corner cutting. Corner cutting in school, oftentimes in gym class, we would have to run laps. And we usually run the laps around a rectangle. And the temptation is, when I get to a corner, instead of going around, I shave off the corner. I cut the corner. Oh, I'm too tired. I didn't sleep well last night. It's a bad day. And I come up with all kinds of excuses. And I try to find the easy way, the quick way of doing something. And I convince myself that it's okay. So then I go ahead and do the shortcut. I make an excuse. Another common one is what they call lip service. Telling somebody what they want to hear in order to get what I want. And with kids, it's, I want to go out and play. No, you got to do the dishes first. I'll do them as soon as I get done. And you convince your mom that, okay, they're going to be done as soon as I get done playing outside. Well, guess what? I got what I want. I went outside and played, and then I come in and I jump on the video game. I don't care about washing dishes. And telling somebody what they want to hear in order to get what I want. Now, in this pandemic, we can come up with all types of excuses. We can minimize and say, well, that mask is too itchy. It bothers my eyes. It's too hard. It doesn't fit. It doesn't feel good. And again, coming up with all kinds of excuses. Or you can simply say, well, yeah, we don't deserve this. It was the Chinese that did it. Blaming somebody. And blaming doesn't make the pandemic go away. Blaming doesn't make my addiction go away. Blaming doesn't make my incarceration go away, my stealing go away. And I have to be aware of how I'm going about convincing myself these things. Minimization, making excuses. Sometimes we have what they call grandiosity. I'm better than that. And I don't have to do that. And what do you expect? And I'm too good. And again, I'm using different attempts to justify and rationalize something. Sometimes we can fall into the trap of revengeful thinking. And some harm has been done to me. Somebody did something that was hurtful, that was painful. And it's difficult to accept a wrong that has been done to me. Unfortunately, some people fall in the trap of seeking revenge, wanting to get even, wanting to have paybacks. And unfortunately, a lot of energy is spent in thinking of ways to get even, to get paid, to have paybacks. And somebody gave me an example of revengeful thinking. It's like drinking poison, wishing that the other person's going to die. Well, duh, if I drink poison, who's going to get hurt? It's going to be me. I'm going to suffer from it. So if I want to try to get back at somebody, if those thoughts are consuming me, I'm suffering. That other person has no effect. He's not feeling that. I'm just punishing myself. Now, go ahead and have wild thoughts and really think of ways of hurting that person. And that can be pretty scary because, again, violent crimes are first committed here. We got to think about it. And we got to justify in our head that it's okay to go ahead and do this. And before the act is done, the plan is firmly cemented in our thoughts. Sometimes I can feel like I'm the victim. Something happened and poor me. It always happens to me, and nobody cares about me. And unfortunately, taking the victim stance does nothing to address the problem. It just justifies in my head that it's okay to feel this way. Now, I mentioned before that if we are to change dramatically the way we do things during this pandemic, there has to be a strong sense of empathy. And back in my days in working with adolescents, I would get an imaginary crystal ball in front of me, and I would look at Jerry and say, Jerry, there's no way that you're going to be happy in life. There's no way that you're going to be successful, because I have a meter in front of me, and this meter measures units of empathy, and it shows that you have 3 units of empathy, which is almost non-existent. Now, Johnny, wow, your chances are phenomenal. My empathy meter reads 95. You have 95 units of empathy. That's fantastic. And the likelihood of you experiencing happiness, success in your life are tremendous, because you are able to put yourself in somebody else's. Now, we've been asked over and over again to social distance. We've been asked to shut down the economy. We've been asked to avoid bars and restaurants. And especially for youth, young adults, that's been very, very difficult. And if I am not concerned about others, then the likelihood, yeah, it's going to happen. I'm just going to go out and do what I want. Because it's convenient, it's pleasurable, it's fun. Only when I have a strong sense of empathy, concerned about the other, is there a great chance that, yeah, I'm willing to do things that are different, that are inconvenient, that are challenging. So being empathetic, showing concern for others are very important. Now, when we look at these thinking errors, and we can be aware of what these thinking errors are, I think it's even more important to be aware of our healthy thinking. What persuaded me to do this positive act? What's going on up here that, I got an A on this test? Well, yeah, I studied. I paid attention in class. I did these things. And I convinced myself that, yeah, I need to focus on this right now. And if that means giving up going to this party, well, yeah, that's what it means. It means avoiding this negative people, places, or things in order to live sustained recovery. That's what it means. But I have to be aware of what am I doing that's helping me live sustained recovery. What am I doing to go through the day without depending upon cigarettes? I have to be aware and figure out what I am doing. Now, sometimes another thinking error is a lack of effort. Oh, it's too hard. I can't do that. and it's too inconvenient. And I convince myself that I know what I should do, but I just simply don't do it. Sometimes, and we've heard this a lot, that change depends upon my attitude. And I could say, I can't do that. That's too demeaning. And it's not a matter of I can't. More than likely, it's a matter of I don't want it. I don't want to do that. Again, being aware of what's happening up here. Not fulfilling promises. Telling my son or daughter, yeah, I'll take you to the ball game. But the weekend comes and I'm out golfing, and then I go to the bar and there goes the ball game. In not following through with a promise. And that can be pretty damaging, especially to a young person. And if they get used to that things are said, but they're not followed through with it, well, yeah, that can have a huge impact on that developing unrealistic expectations, not being realistic. And we have to be grounded in what we're telling ourselves what we're going to do. And certainly we have to be realistic. Poor decision making. Trying to figure out, well, how did this happen? How did I go about making this decision? And when I make poor decisions, I go into the consequences. I think primarily of the present. The future doesn't matter. I'm only concerned on immediate gratification, getting what I want. And as long as I get it, that's the only thing that matters. Being stubborn, not willing to put forth the effort into change. I'm not going to wear that mask. I'm not going to social distance. I'm not going to go into a store looking like a freak. It's too inconvenient to remember to wear the mask. Or going out the door, I get in my car, oh, I forgot my mask. I'm not going to go back in the house. No. I'm going to go back in the house. I'm not going to be cemented in my stubborn ways. Willing to plan ahead. When I would ask somebody the question that, okay, you're going to the bar tonight. Oh, what's your plan? Oh, I don't know. I'll just play it by ear. Well, when I hear that, I'm just going to play it by ear. It's like, well, it's giving me permission to do whatever happens, to do whatever I want to do. But if I have a plan, I'm going to go out and I'm going to make sure that I have my keys, I have my mask, I'm going to have 2 beers, and that's it. I'm going to smoke my medical marijuana 3 times a day, and not 20 times a day. Whatever it is, I need a plan, and avoid that. I'll just play things by ear. Anger is another frightening way to think. Anger has everything to do with power and control. And I'm going to be doing another seminar about anger later on this year. And lastly, power plays, manipulation, trying to get what I want. And some people are very skilled at manipulating, doing something, and it may seeing that this is my purpose, but I have totally different intentions. Playing dumb. And again, that's those three famous words. Ooh, I don't know. It just happened. Ignoring or bribing. If you do this, I'll give you this. Trying to, again, what I want. So if we're sincere about changing behavior, about getting to that February 3rd and ending Groundhog's Day, we have to be aware of what is happening. We have to learn more about ourselves. And we have to be motivated. We got to want it. And then we got to do things and put it into action. I define counseling as an opportunity to get to know myself a little bit better. And I simply try to give opportunities to the other person to do that, to gain a better understanding of themselves, to gain a better understanding, awareness of what their behaviors are like, to gain a better understanding, a deeper knowledge of what their thinking is like. And if I do that, then my actions are going to reflect that hard work. But I got to be willing and open to learn more about myself. Now, I know myself better than anybody else knows. And you, the same way. You know yourself. You've been living in that body all your life. You know yourself better than anybody else. But we can still learn something new every day of our life. And if we continue to do that up until we die, fantastic. We have had many opportunities to learn about COVID-19. And with that knowledge, we can change our behavior, we can change our thinking, and we can positive results. So that is a simplified version of how change can come about. I hope you got something from this presentation, and have a good evening.